I was standing at my kitchen window with a cup of coffee when I noticed something that made my blood run cold: a massive PVC pipe snaking up from my lower property line. And it wasn't mine. My name is Stephen Lawson, and I'd been living on my 40-acre property in rural Jefferson County, Colorado, for 3 years. The place was my sanctuary, tucked away in the foothills with a natural spring that had been flowing since before Colorado was even a state. That spring was specifically mentioned in my deed, a detail I'd made sure of when I bought the property. The water was crystal clear, cold as ice even in August, and it fed a small creek that ran through my land before disappearing into the forest beyond. I set down my coffee and grabbed my boots. It was early June, and the morning sun was just starting to burn off the dew. I'd noticed the water flow from my spring had decreased over the past month, but I'd chalked it up to a dry spell. Now, seeing that pipe, I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly where my water was going. The pipe was industrial-sized, maybe 6 inches in diameter, and it ran from somewhere near my spring straight down toward the property line I shared with Meadowbrook Estates, the HOA community that had sprouted up 5 years ago on what used to be the old Patterson Ranch. When the developers had approached me about selling my land, I'd turned them down flat. I liked my privacy, and I wasn't interested in living in a place where someone could tell me what color to paint my mailbox. I followed the pipe through the tall grass, my boots getting soaked. The closer I got to the spring, the angrier I became. Someone had dug a trench, installed this pipe system, and covered it back up. They'd done it professionally too, with the grass replanted so it would blend in. If I hadn't been looking from my elevated kitchen window at just the right angle, I might never have noticed it. When I reached my spring, which bubbled up from between 2 massive granite boulders, I found the source of my problem. Someone had installed a pump system with a concrete housing, filters, and a diversion valve. They'd basically turned my natural spring into their personal water supply. The setup must have cost thousands of dollars, and they'd done it on my property without asking permission. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Then I followed the pipe downhill toward the Meadowbrook Estates property line. The fence between our properties was old barbed wire that had been there since the Patterson days, and the pipe went right under it. I climbed through the fence, not caring that I was technically trespassing, and kept following the pipe. It led me straight to a man-made lake, maybe 2 acres in size, sitting right in the middle of the HOA community. I'd seen it from the road before, a pretty little lake with a fountain in the middle and a walking path around it. What I hadn't known was that my spring water was feeding it. "Excuse me, sir. This is private property." I turned around to find a woman in her mid-50s marching toward me. She was wearing white capri pants, a pink polo shirt, and a visor that said HOA Board President in embroidered letters. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and she had that particular expression I'd come to recognize over the years, the one that said she was used to getting her way. "I'm aware," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm Stephen Lawson. I own the property that borders yours to the north." "Then you're trespassing, Mr. Lawson. I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately, or I'll call the police." "Be my guest," I said, pulling out my phone again and taking pictures of where the pipe emerged and fed into the lake. "Because I'll be calling them too. That pipe you've got running up onto my property, it's stealing my water." Her face went red. "That's ridiculous. This lake is fed by a natural spring that the developers included in our community amenities." "Wrong," I said, snapping another photo. "That's my natural spring on my property, which is specifically deeded to me. You've got a pump and piping system illegally installed on my land." "I think you're confused about the property boundaries," she said, but there was something in her voice now, a slight waver that told me she knew exactly what they'd done. I'm not confused about anything. My name is on the deed, and so is that spring. I want your equipment off my property by the end of the week, or I'm filing a lawsuit. She crossed her arms. Mr. Lawson, I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board. I can assure you that everything we've done is completely legal. The developers conducted a full survey, and the spring is on common HOA property. Then you won't mind if I bring the county surveyor out to verify that, will you? Patricia's mouth became a thin line. You do what you need to do. But I'm warning you, if you damage any HOA property or continue to trespass, we will pursue legal action. Same to you, I said. I turned and walked back toward the fence, feeling her eyes boring into my back. When I got home, I went straight to my file cabinet and pulled out my property deed. I'd reviewed it 100 times when I bought the place, but I read through it again carefully. There it was, clear as day, in the legal description, including all water rights and natural springs located on said property, specifically the spring located at approximately 39.7234 degrees north, 105.2156 degrees west, and all water emanating therefrom. I also had the original survey from when I'd purchased the property, with the spring clearly marked within my boundaries. The developer of Meadowbrook Estates had tried to claim the spring was on their land. That was bold-faced theft. I called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, who I'd used for the property purchase. His secretary put me through right away. "Stephen, good to hear from you." "What's going on?" I explained the situation, and I could hear him typing as I talked. "Okay, this is pretty clear-cut," Marcus said. "You have water rights explicitly stated in your deed, plus the survey documentation. They've committed trespass, theft of resources, and probably a few other violations. Do you know when they installed this system? Had to be within the last year. I walked that area last summer, and there was nothing there then. First thing we do is send them a cease and desist letter. Then we file for an injunction to have the equipment removed. After that, we can talk about damages. If they've been diverting your water for a year, that's a significant loss of resources. Do you use the spring for anything? I've got livestock that drink from the creek it feeds, plus it's part of my property value, and honestly, Marcus, it's the principle of the thing. They can't just come onto my land and take what they want." Agreed. I'll draft the letter today and have it couriered to the HOA board tomorrow. In the meantime, take as many pictures and videos as you can of the entire setup. Document everything. I spent the rest of the day doing exactly that. I recorded video of the pump system, the pipe route, the lake, everything. I also drove into Boulder and bought a flow meter, which I installed downstream from where they'd tapped into the spring. I wanted to know exactly how much water they were taking. The meter's reading shocked me. They were diverting nearly 70% of my spring's output. The creek that ran through my property, which used to be a healthy flow year-round, had been reduced to a trickle. My small herd of cattle had been walking further to reach other water sources, something I'd noticed but hadn't connected to the spring until now. 2 days later, Marcus called me back. I sent the cease and desist yesterday morning. I just got a response from the HOA's attorney. They're claiming adverse possession and arguing that the spring was improperly included in your deed due to a surveying error. That's complete nonsense. I know, but it's their legal strategy. They're saying the developers of Meadowbrook Estates performed their own survey and determined the spring was on their land. They're claiming you've known about their use of the water and never objected, which constitutes acceptance. I didn't know about it until 3 days ago. That's what we'll argue. But Stephen, This is going to be a fight. The HOA has deep pockets and they've clearly invested significant money in this lake system. They're not going to give it up easily. So what's our next move? I'm filing for an emergency injunction in district court. We'll request the court order them to cease water diversion immediately pending a full hearing. I'm also going to request a new official survey by a court-appointed surveyor. That should settle the boundary question once and for all. How long will this take? The injunction hearing should be within 2 weeks. The full case could be 6 months to a year. I felt my jaw clench. A year? They can steal my water for a year. Not if we win the injunction. Judge Morrison is usually pretty good about protecting property rights. If we can show clear evidence that it's your spring, he'll order them to stop while the case proceeds. The next week was tense. I walked my property line twice a day, documenting everything. The pump was running constantly, and I could see the lake level in Meadowbrook Estates staying high despite the lack of rain. Meanwhile, my creek continued to dwindle. On day 4, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, and it was written on official letterhead with Patricia Henderson's signature at the bottom. Dear Mr. Lawson, it began. It has come to our attention that you have been trespassing on HOA property and making false claims regarding our community water features. We are prepared to offer you a one-time settlement of $5,000 to resolve this matter and confirm our water rights. Please contact our attorney, Rebecca Walsh, to discuss this offer. If you do not accept within 10 business days, we will pursue trespassing charges and file a lawsuit for harassment and defamation. I called Marcus immediately and read him the letter. They're scared, he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. $5,000 is nothing compared to what this system cost them. They're hoping you'll take a quick payout and go away. Not happening. Good, don't respond to them at all. Let me handle all communication through their attorney. Our injunction hearing is set for next Wednesday at 9 in the morning. Jefferson County District Court. Judge David Morrison presiding. I spent the days leading up to the hearing preparing my case. Marcus had me write out a detailed timeline of everything I'd observed. I organized all my photos and videos, printed out copies of my deed and survey, and even researched Colorado water law. I learned that water rights in Colorado were serious business. The state operated under the prior appropriation doctrine, which meant that whoever had legal rights to the water first got priority. My deed explicitly included the spring and all water rights, which meant I had absolute priority over any later claims. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Patricia Henderson's smug face, about the sophisticated pump system they'd installed without permission, about the sheer audacity of coming onto my land and taking what was mine. Wednesday morning arrived cool and clear. I put on my best suit, which I hadn't worn since I'd bought the property, and drove to the Jefferson County Courthouse in Golden. Marcus met me in the parking lot. Ready? He asked. More than ready. We walked into the courthouse together. The hearing was in a smaller courtroom, not the grand main courtroom I'd seen on TV. Patricia Henderson was already there with 3 other people I didn't recognize, plus their attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s wearing an expensive suit. Judge Morrison came in exactly at 9, and we all stood. He was in his early 60s with gray hair and glasses, and he had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every legal trick in the book. "All right," he said, settling into his chair. "We're here for an emergency injunction request in the matter of Lawson versus Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Mr. Chen, you're representing the plaintiff." "Yes, Your Honor." "And Miss Walsh for the defendant." "Correct, Your Honor." Mr. Chen, make your case. Marcus stood and launched into a clear, concise explanation of the situation. He presented my deed, the survey from my property purchase, and photos of the pump system on my land. He showed the video I'd taken of the pipe running from my spring to the HOA lake. Your Honor, Marcus said, this is a straightforward case of trespass and theft of resources. Mr. Lawson has documented proof that the spring is on his property and that water rights are explicitly deeded to him. The defendants installed an extensive pump system without permission and have been diverting the majority of his spring water for their own use. We're requesting an immediate injunction ordering them to cease all water diversion and remove their equipment from Mr. Lawson's property. Judge Morrison looked at the photographs. Miss Walsh, I'm looking at what appears to be a substantial pump installation. When was this system installed on Mr. Lawson's property? Rebecca Walsh stood. Your Honor, the defendants dispute that the equipment is on Mr. Lawson's property. The spring in question is actually located on HOA common land. The developers of Meadowbrook Estates conducted a comprehensive survey before construction began, and that survey clearly shows the spring within HOA boundaries. You have that survey with you? Yes, Your Honor. She handed a document to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Morrison studied it for a moment. This survey is dated April 2019. Mr. Chen, when did your client purchase his property? March 2023, Your Honor. And that survey shows the spring on your client's property? Yes, Your Honor. The survey was conducted by Rocky Mountain Land Survey, a licensed and bonded company that's been operating in Colorado for 30 years. Judge Morrison looked at the HOA's survey again. This survey was conducted by Mountain West Surveying. Miss Walsh, are you aware that Mountain West was owned by the same parent company that developed Meadowbrook Estates? I saw Rebecca Walsh's face flicker with surprise. No, Your Honor, I was not aware of that. Well, I am, because I've seen their surveys disputed in my courtroom 3 times in the past 5 years. The company was eventually sanctioned by the state for improper surveying practices. Judge Morrison set the papers down. But let's set that aside for a moment. Miss Walsh, when did your clients install this pump system? The lake and associated water systems were installed during the development phase, between 2019 and 2021. So you're telling me this system was installed before Mr. Lawson even purchased his property? That's correct, Your Honor. Judge Morrison turned to Marcus. Mr. Chen, did your client know about this water diversion when he purchased the property? No, Your Honor. The pump system was concealed underground. Mr. Lawson only discovered it 2 weeks ago when he noticed the decreased water flow and investigated. Your Honor, Rebecca Walsh interjected, if I may, the spring and lake system have been openly operating for over 5 years. The lake is visible from the main road. Mr. Lawson had ample opportunity to investigate the water source before purchasing his property. The lake being visible doesn't mean Mr. Lawson knew it was being fed by his spring, Judge Morrison said. Mr. Lawson, please stand. I stood up, my heart pounding. Did you know about the water diversion before you bought your property? No, sir, Your Honor. I knew the HOA community was there, and I'd seen the lake from the road, but I had no reason to think they were tapping into my spring. The pump system is underground and hidden. I only found it because I happened to be looking out my kitchen window at the right angle to see where grass had been disturbed. And what was your understanding of the water rights when you purchased the property? My deed specifically mentions the spring and water rights, Your Honor. That was one of the reasons I bought the property. I have cattle, and I needed reliable water access. The real estate agent and the title company both confirmed the spring was on my land, and the water rights were included. Judge Morrison nodded and gestured for me to sit down. He looked at both attorneys. Here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm ordering an immediate independent survey by the county surveyor's office. Second, pending the results of that survey, I'm issuing a temporary injunction. Meadowbrook Estates HOA will cease all water diversion from the disputed spring effective immediately. Your Honor, that's going to cause significant hardship to the community, Rebecca Walsh said quickly. The lake is a central feature of the development. Property values and homeowner expectations are tied to it. If it suddenly drains, then perhaps the HOA board should have been more careful about where they source their water, Judge Morrison said sharply. If the county survey confirms Mr. Lawson's property boundaries, this HOA has committed serious trespass and theft. I'm not going to allow that to continue while we sort this out. You have until 5 p.m. today to shut down the pump system. Patricia Henderson stood up abruptly. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Our community has invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in that lake system. You can't just, Madam, sit down, Judge Morrison said, his voice hard. You're not an attorney and you don't get to address the court without permission. Patricia sat down, her face bright red. The county surveyor will conduct the survey within the next 10 business days. We'll reconvene when the results are available. Until then, the injunction stands. The defendants will cease all water diversion and will not enter the plaintiff's property for any reason. Is that clear? Yes, Your Honor, both attorneys said in unison. We all stood as Judge Morrison left the courtroom. As soon as he was gone, Patricia Henderson turned to me. This isn't over, she said, her voice shaking with rage. You're going to destroy our entire community over some water. We're going to fight this all the way, and when we win, we're coming after you for damages. Patricia, don't say another word, Rebecca Walsh said sharply, grabbing her client's arm. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. Let's go. We walked out of the courthouse together. Once we were outside, Marcus grinned. That went better than I expected. Judge Morrison doesn't tolerate property rights violations, and the fact that their surveyor was connected to the developer really hurt their credibility. So what happens now? County surveyor does their work. If it confirms your boundaries, which I'm confident it will, then we go back to court, and they'll be ordered to remove all equipment and probably pay damages. The HOA will have to find a new water source for their lake. Good, I said. I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. That evening, I drove down to the property line and watched as a couple of workers from the HOA shut down the pump system. Patricia Henderson was there, supervising with her arms crossed and a scowl on her face. When she saw me, she stormed over to the fence. I hope you're happy, she yelled. Do you know what's going to happen when that lake drains? Property values are going to plummet. Homeowners are going to be furious. We could face dozens of lawsuits. You should have thought about that before you stole my water, I called back. We didn't steal anything. That spring has been feeding our lake for years. We maintained it, we paid for all the infrastructure, we built something beautiful for our community. And now you're going to take it all away because of some technicality. It's not a technicality, it's my property. She pointed a finger at me. You know what? Fine. We'll find another water source, we'll dig our own wells, we'll truck in water, whatever it takes. But don't think you can just live up there on your little mountain and ignore the community around you. We have rules here, standards. People like you think you're above it all, but you're not. This community was built for a reason and we're going to protect it. Good luck with that, I said, and turned to walk back up to my house. Over the next 10 days, I watched my spring return to its normal flow. The creek on my property swelled back to its usual width and depth. My cattle started using their old watering spots again. It was like watching my land heal. The county surveyor came out on day 8, a quiet guy named Tom Miller who spent 6 hours with his crew setting up equipment and taking measurements. I offered him water and let him use my bathroom, but otherwise, I stayed out of his way. He didn't offer any opinions about what he was finding, just did his job professionally and efficiently. On day 12, Marcus called me. Survey results are in. The spring is on your property about 50 feet inside your boundary line, not even close to the HOA land. Judge Morrison has scheduled a hearing for tomorrow at 2 p.m. to review the results and issue a final ruling. That was fast. He put a rush on it. I think he wants to settle this before the HOA tries any more shenanigans. The next day, I returned to the courthouse. This time, Patricia Henderson had brought reinforcements. There were at least a dozen people in the courtroom, all wearing matching Meadowbrook Estates Community Proud T-shirts. They glared at me as I walked to the plaintiff's table. Judge Morrison entered and we all stood. He looked at the crowd in the courtroom and frowned. I see we have spectators today. Everyone is welcome to observe, but I will have absolute silence. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed and held in contempt. Is that understood? There were murmurs of agreement. All right, let's proceed. I've reviewed the county surveyor's report. The survey confirms that the natural spring in question is located on property owned by Mr. Stephen Lawson, well within his boundary lines. The coordinates match those listed in Mr. Lawson's deed. There is no ambiguity about this. I saw several of the HOA supporters shift uncomfortably in their seats. The original survey provided by the defendants, conducted by Mountain West Surveying, was inaccurate. Whether this was due to incompetence or intentional misrepresentation, I cannot say. But it is clear that the pump system installed by the defendants is located entirely on Mr. Lawson's property without his permission. Judge Morrison looked directly at Patricia Henderson. Madam, as president of the HOA board, were you aware that this pump system was on Mr. Lawson's property? Rebecca Walsh stood quickly. Your Honor, I don't think. I'm asking your client a direct question, Counselor. If she doesn't want to answer, she can take the fifth. Patricia stood up slowly. Your Honor, we relied on the survey provided by the developers. We believed the spring was on HOA property. When did the HOA take ownership of the lake system from the developers? Patricia looked at her attorney, who nodded. In 2021, when the development was completed. And at that time, did you review the property boundaries? We assumed everything was in order. Assumption isn't due diligence, Judge Morrison said. Miss Walsh, your clients have been diverting water from Mr. Lawson's property for at least 3 years, possibly longer. They've installed extensive equipment without permission. They've ignored a cease and desist letter. What damages is the plaintiff seeking? Marcus stood. Your Honor, we're seeking immediate removal of all equipment from Mr. Lawson's property at the defendant's expense. We're also seeking compensation for water theft. Based on the flow rate and duration, the defendants have diverted approximately 30 million gallons of water over the past 3 years. Under Colorado water law, water rights have significant monetary value. We're requesting compensation of $50,000. A gasp went up from the HOA supporters in the courtroom. Your Honor, that's excessive, Rebecca Walsh said. The water was flowing naturally. It's not as if Mr. Lawson was selling it. The water was Mr. Lawson's property, Judge Morrison said. The defendants took it without permission. That's theft. Miss Walsh, does your client have a counteroffer? Rebecca Walsh turned and had a whispered conversation with Patricia Henderson and the other board members. Finally, she turned back to the judge. "We're prepared to offer $10,000 and removal of the equipment." "Your Honor, that's unacceptable," Marcus said. "The equipment removal is not a negotiable point, it's a requirement. The defendants trespassed and stole resources for years. $10,000 doesn't begin to cover the damages." Judge Morrison thought for a moment. "Here's my ruling. The defendants will remove all equipment from Mr. Lawson's property within 30 days. They will restore the land to its original condition, including proper grading and reseeding. They will pay Mr. Lawson $35,000 in damages for water theft. Additionally, they will pay Mr. Lawson's legal fees. Finally, I'm issuing a permanent injunction prohibiting the defendants or any member of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA from entering Mr. Lawson's property for any reason without his explicit written permission." "Your Honor, please," Patricia Henderson said, standing up again. "That money will come from our HOA dues. You're punishing innocent homeowners who had nothing to do with this. Then perhaps those innocent homeowners should elect a more responsible board," Judge Morrison said. "This isn't a dispute over a survey line or a boundary fence. Your organization installed expensive equipment on someone else's property and stole their resources for years. You're lucky I'm not referring this to the district attorney for criminal charges." That got the room's attention. I saw several of the HOA supporters looking nervous now. The defendants have 30 days to comply. If the equipment is not removed in that time frame, Mr. Lawson is authorized to remove it himself and bill the HOA for all costs. This court is adjourned. Judge Morrison stood and left the courtroom. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. As I stood to leave, Patricia Henderson pushed past her attorney and confronted me directly. "I hope you're satisfied," she hissed. "You've just destroyed our community. That lake is going to dry up, property values are going to tank, and it's all your fault." "No," I said calmly. "It's your fault for stealing my water in the first place. You could have asked permission. You could have offered to pay me for water rights. Instead, you just took what you wanted and hoped I wouldn't notice. We built something beautiful. That lake is enjoyed by hundreds of families. Children play there, people walk around it every evening. It's the heart of our community. And now it's going to turn into a mud pit. That's not my problem." "You selfish," she lunged forward, and for a moment I thought she was actually going to try to hit me. Her attorney grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Patricia, that's enough," Rebecca Walsh said firmly. "We're leaving now." The whole group of HOA supporters filed out, shooting me dirty looks as they went. Marcus waited until the room was clear, then turned to me with a grin. "Congratulations. That's about as decisive a victory as you're going to get. Think they'll appeal?" "They could try, but they don't have grounds. The survey is clear, your deed is clear, and Judge Morrison's ruling is based on established property law. An appeal would just cost them more money." "What about that comment about criminal charges?" Marcus's grin faded a bit. "That's actually a real possibility. What they did could be charged as felony theft, trespassing, or destruction of property. If the DA's office decides to pursue it, the HOA board members could face criminal liability." "I'm not interested in pressing charges," I said. "I just want my land left alone." "That's your choice, but the judge's comment might have been strategic. It puts pressure on the HOA to comply quickly and completely." We walked out of the courthouse together. As we reached the parking lot, I noticed a news van from one of the Denver stations. A reporter with a microphone was interviewing Patricia Henderson and some of the other HOA board members. "Mr. Lawson," the reporter called out when she saw me. "Can we get a statement?" No comment. I said, getting into my truck. But as I drove away, I could hear Patricia Henderson's voice rising. This is about more than water rights. This is about the kind of community we want to live in. Do we want people who think only about themselves, or do we want neighbors who care about the greater good? I rolled my eyes and turned up the radio. Over the next few days, the story exploded in local media. I got calls from reporters, bloggers, even a producer from a national news show. I ignored all of them. This wasn't about publicity for me. It was about protecting my property. What I couldn't ignore was the harassment. It started small, a few angry letters in my mailbox, some nasty comments on local social media pages. Then someone spray-painted "selfish jerk" on my gate. My mailbox was knocked over twice. I found nails scattered on my driveway. I called the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and filed reports each time. A deputy named Sarah Rodriguez came out to take my statements. "This is probably coming from people in the HOA community," she said, taking photos of the spray paint. "We've had a spike in reports about the conflict over there. Apparently some residents are pretty upset about the lake situation." "I didn't create this situation," I said. "They stole my water." "I know, sir, and you have every right to protect your property. But I'd recommend installing some security cameras, just in case things escalate." I took her advice and ordered a comprehensive camera system. I set up cameras at my gate, along the fence line with the HOA property, and around my house. Within 2 days of installation, they proved their worth. I was reviewing the footage from the previous night when I saw 2 figures climb over my fence at around 2 a.m. They walked directly to where the old pump equipment was still located. The HOA had 10 days left to remove it and started doing something. The camera quality wasn't great in the dark, but it looked like they were trying to restart the pump. I called Deputy Rodriguez immediately. "I've got trespassers on camera," I told her. "They're trying to turn the pump back on. I'm sending a unit now. Don't confront them yourself." But I was already out the door with a flashlight and my cell phone. I wasn't going to let them restart the theft of my water. I approached quietly, the flashlight off. As I got closer, I could hear voices. "I don't understand why it's not working," a man's voice said. "Because the judge ordered it shut down, genius," a woman replied. "We need to override the shut-off valve. Patricia said we just need to get it running again. If the lake stays full, maybe Lawson will back off." I flipped on my flashlight, shining it directly at them. 2 people, a man and a woman in their 40s, both wearing dark clothing. They froze like deer in headlights. "What are you doing on my property?" I said loudly. "We're just checking on the equipment," the woman stammered. "We're part of the HOA maintenance committee. You're trespassing and attempting to violate a court order. The sheriff is on the way." The man's eyes went wide. "Wait, we can explain it to the deputies." They looked at each other, and I could see them calculating whether to run. But the sound of sirens in the distance made the decision for them. They stood there miserably as 2 sheriff's vehicles pulled up to my gate. Deputy Rodriguez walked down with another deputy. "These the trespassers?" "Yes, madam. They were trying to restart the pump system that's under court order to remain shut down." The deputies took statements from everyone. The trespassers were identified as Mark and Ellen Foster, residents of Meadowbrook Estates. They claimed Patricia Henderson had told them the court order didn't apply to routine maintenance, and that the pump just needed to be restarted. "That's not how court orders work," Deputy Rodriguez said flatly. She turned to me. "Do you want to press charges?" I looked at the Fosters, who were now clearly terrified. They weren't bad people, probably. Just folks who'd been manipulated by their HOA president into doing something stupid. "Only if this happens again," I said, "but I want it on record." Deputy Rodriguez nodded. "Mr. and Mrs. Foster, you're receiving a warning. If you set foot on Mr. Lawson's property again, you will be arrested for trespassing. Do you understand?" They both nodded frantically. "And I'm going to have a conversation with Miss Henderson about witness tampering and obstruction of justice." That got my attention. Witness tampering. If she's telling community members to violate a court order, that's a crime. Judge Morrison was clear about the injunction. The deputies took the Fosters back to their vehicle and left. I watched them go, then looked down at the pump equipment. The HOA had 20 days left to remove it, but I had a feeling this wasn't going to be the last incident. The next morning, I got a certified letter from Rebecca Walsh, the HOA's attorney. It was a formal notice that the HOA would be removing the pump equipment starting the following Monday, and that the work would take approximately 5 days. They requested permission to access my property during business hours to complete the removal. I called Marcus, who reviewed the letter and said it was reasonable. "They're complying with the court order. Let them do the work, but document everything. Take photos before, during, and after. Make sure they restore the land properly." Monday morning arrived with a work crew and a supervisor named Carlos. He was professional and courteous, showing me the work plan and asking where I wanted the excavated area restored. The crew spent the week carefully removing the pump, the concrete housing, the pipes, and all the related infrastructure. They even removed the pipes that ran down to the HOA property line. Carlos kept me updated each day. "We're going to fill in the excavation, grade it to match the surrounding terrain, and reseed with native grass," he explained. "Should look natural within a few months. What about the pipe under the fence? Removing that too. We'll seal both ends and fill the tunnel." By Friday afternoon, the work was done. I walked the area with Carlos, taking photos of the restoration. They'd done a good job, honestly. You could tell the ground had been disturbed, but in time it would blend in. "Thanks for being reasonable about this," Carlos said as he packed up. "I've worked for this HOA for 3 years, and this whole situation has been a nightmare." "Not your fault," I said. "You're just doing your job." "Yeah, but between you and me, the board should have handled this differently from the start. They knew there was a boundary dispute, but they just plowed ahead anyway." "They knew," Carlos looked uncomfortable. "I've said too much. Just good luck with everything." He left before I could ask more questions, but his comment stuck with me. They knew there was a boundary dispute. That put things in a different light. I called Marcus and told him what Carlos had said. "That's interesting," Marcus said slowly. "If they knowingly installed equipment on disputed property, that could affect the damages calculation. It might even support criminal charges." "I told you I don't want to press charges." "I know, but it's worth keeping in mind. How's the restoration look?" "Good. They did quality work." "And the payment? Have they sent the check?" "Not yet." "They have until next Wednesday per the court order." "If it's not here by then, let me know and I'll file for enforcement." The check arrived on Tuesday, exactly 1 week before the deadline. $35,000 plus $12,000 for legal fees. I deposited it immediately. I thought that would be the end of it. The equipment was gone, the land was restored. I'd been compensated. But I underestimated Patricia Henderson's dedication to making my life difficult. 2 weeks after the equipment removal, I received a letter from the Jefferson County Planning and Zoning Department. There had been a complaint filed against my property for unpermitted agricultural use, excessive livestock density, and zoning violations. I called the county office and spoke to a planner named Janet Cooper. "Mr. Lawson, we received a complaint about your property. The complainant alleges that you're running a commercial cattle operation without proper permits. I have 12 head of cattle on 40 acres. That's not commercial, that's personal use." "I understand, but we're required to investigate every complaint. I'll need to come out and do a site inspection. Who filed the complaint? I'm not allowed to disclose that information, but I knew who it was. Janet Cooper came out the following Thursday. She walked the property with me, counted my cattle, reviewed my water sources, and inspected my barn and fencing. She was thorough but fair. "Everything looks fine," she said, making notes on her tablet. "You're well within the allowable livestock density for your zoning classification. You don't need any additional permits, so the complaint was bogus." "The complaint was unfounded," she said carefully. "I'll file my report, and that should close the matter. However, Mr. Lawson, I should tell you that this is the third complaint we've received about your property in the past month." "3 complaints. What were the others?" "One alleged illegal dumping. Another alleged you were running an unlicensed business. Both were investigated and found to be without merit. Let me guess you can't tell me who filed those complaints either." She gave me a sympathetic look. "I can tell you that all 3 came from the same source, and that we're aware of the legal situation between you and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. If we continue to receive frivolous complaints, we may take action against the complainant for harassment." I appreciate that. After she left, I called Marcus again and told him about the complaints. "That's harassment," he said immediately, "and it might violate the judge's order about not interfering with your property. Document everything, and if it continues, we'll file for a restraining order against Patricia Henderson." The complaints did continue. Over the next month, I received visits from the county health department. Complaint about improper sewage disposal. My septic system was fine. The state wildlife department. Complaint about illegal hunting. I hadn't hunted in 6 months. And even the IRS. Anonymous tip about unreported income. My taxes were clean. Each inspection found nothing wrong. Each one took time away from my work, and each one was clearly designed to harass and intimidate me. I'd had enough. "Marcus, file for the restraining order. And while you're at it, I want to explore that comment Carlos made about the HOA knowing there was a boundary dispute. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if they knowingly trespassed and stole my water, that changes things. I want to know what they knew and when they knew it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "That would require discovery. We need to reopen the case or file a new civil action for fraud and intentional misconduct." "Do it. I'm tired of being pushed around. This could get expensive, Stephen, and contentious." "I don't care. They're not going to stop until there are real consequences." Marcus filed a new civil complaint the following week, alleging fraud, intentional trespass, and civil conspiracy. We requested full discovery, including all board meeting minutes, emails, and communications related to the water system and property boundaries. The HOA's attorney, Rebecca Walsh, fought the discovery request hard. She filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the matter had already been resolved by Judge Morrison's ruling. But Marcus countered that the new complaint addressed different issues, not just the trespass itself, but the HOA's state of mind and potential fraud. Judge Morrison assigned the new case to Judge Angela Torres, who had a reputation for being tough on civil fraud. She denied the motion to dismiss and ordered full discovery within 60 days. The results were damning. Marcus called me 3 weeks into the discovery process, his voice excited. "Stephen, you need to see what we found. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" I drove to Boulder and met him at his law office. He had dozens of documents spread across his conference room table. "These are excerpts from HOA board meeting minutes," he said, pointing to several highlighted pages. "Look at this one, dated March 2019, during the development phase." I read the highlighted section. Discussion of water source for community lake. Developer survey shows natural spring on adjacent property owned by Patterson Estate. Board votes to proceed with water system pending acquisition or easement negotiation. They knew the spring wasn't on their property, I said, looking up at Marcus. It gets better. Look at this email from Patricia Henderson to the developer, dated May 2019. The email read, "Per our discussion, the Patterson property is still in probate and likely to be subdivided and sold. Recommend we proceed with lake infrastructure and address spring access issue when new owner is determined. By the time anyone notices, system will be established fact. Easier to negotiate from possession." I felt my hands clenching into fists. She planned this from the beginning. There's more. After you bought the property in 2023, there's an email from her to the other board members. Look. This email was dated April 2023, just a month after I'd purchased my land. New owner of northern property seems to be reclusive type. No indication he's aware of lake water source. Recommend we continue current operations unless directly challenged. They knew I owned the spring. They knew they were trespassing, and they did it anyway. Marcus nodded grimly. This is fraud, Stephen. Intentional knowing fraud, and it's going to change everything. We filed an amended complaint with the new evidence. This time, we didn't just sue the HOA, we sued the board members individually, including Patricia Henderson, for fraud, conspiracy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We increased the damages claim to $200,000. The discovery process also turned up something else interesting. Several homeowners in Meadowbrook Estates had questioned the water source over the years, and Patricia Henderson had repeatedly told them it was handled and legal. Some homeowners had even suggested reaching out to me to negotiate water rights, but Patricia had shut down those discussions. Judge Torres scheduled a hearing to review the new evidence. This time, the courtroom was packed not just with HOA supporters, but with homeowners who were realizing their board president had lied to them. Rebecca Walsh looked uncomfortable as she stood before the judge. "Your Honor, while my clients may have exercised poor judgment, there was no intentional fraud. They relied on the developer's survey and believed they had legal rights to the water." "Counselor, I've read the discovery materials," Judge Torres said, her voice sharp. "Your client, Miss Henderson specifically, explicitly discussed proceeding with the water theft, and yes, I'm calling it theft before addressing the legal issues. That's not poor judgment. That's intentional misconduct." Patricia Henderson stood up. "Your Honor, I did what was best for the community. That lake is essential to our property values and quality of life. I couldn't let one person selfish." "Miss Henderson, sit down," Judge Torres said. "You don't get to steal someone else's property because you think it serves the greater good. That's not how property law works." "But Your Honor, sit down." Patricia sat, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Judge Torres looked at both attorneys. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm granting summary judgment in favor of the plaintiff on the fraud and intentional misconduct claims. The evidence is overwhelming. The only question remaining is damages. We'll have a hearing on damages in 30 days. Mr. Chen, please prepare a detailed damages calculation including punitive damages." "Yes, Your Honor." "And Miss Walsh, I'm going to say this clearly so there's no misunderstanding. Your clients are facing significant personal liability here. Miss Henderson's actions as board president may have been within her authority, but fraud is never within anyone's authority. I strongly suggest your clients consider settlement." After the hearing, I walked out of the courthouse to find a small group of Meadowbrook Estates residents waiting. But they weren't there to confront me, they were there to apologize. A woman in her 30s approached me. "Mr. Lawson, I'm Nicole Ortiz. I live in Meadowbrook. I just want to say I'm so sorry for everything you've been through. Most of us had no idea what Patricia was doing. We were told the lake was fed by a legal water source," a man added. "If we'd known the truth, we would have stopped this years ago." "Some of us tried to question her," another woman said, "but Patricia always shut us down. She said asking questions was undermining the board and harming the community." Nicole spoke again. "We're having a special election to remove Patricia and the other board members who knew about this. We want you to know that Meadowbrook isn't what she made it out to be. Most of us are just regular people who want to be good neighbors." I felt some of my anger dissipate. I appreciate that. I never had a problem with the community, just with people stealing my property. "We understand. And we're going to make this right, whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, the story continued to develop. A Denver Post investigative reporter dug into Patricia Henderson's background and discovered this wasn't her first controversy with property issues. At her previous HOA in Aurora, she'd been part of a board that had been sued for improperly foreclosing on homeowners and had lost a significant judgment. The Jefferson County DA's office also started taking an interest. Deputy Rodriguez called me one afternoon. "Mr. Lawson, I wanted to give you a heads up. The DA is reviewing the case for potential criminal charges. Theft of this magnitude, with this level of planning and intention, could be prosecuted as felony theft and criminal conspiracy." I thought the judge already ruled on this civilly. Civil and criminal are separate. You can win a civil judgment and still have the DA pursue criminal charges. It's up to you whether you want to cooperate with a criminal investigation. I thought about it. Part of me wanted Patricia Henderson to face real consequences. But another part just wanted to move on with my life. What would criminal charges mean for her, if convicted? Probably probation, community service, restitution, maybe jail time depending on the judge. It would also be a permanent criminal record. Let me think about it. I talked to Marcus, who had mixed feelings. Criminally charging her sends a message that this behavior has serious consequences, but it also means you'll be involved in another lengthy legal process. More testimony, more court dates, more publicity. In the end, I decided to let the DA make the call. If they thought criminal charges were warranted, I'd cooperate. But I wasn't going to push for it. The damages hearing arrived on a cool October morning. Meadowbrook Estates had a new board president, Nicole Ortiz, the woman who'd apologized to me. She attended the hearing along with Rebecca Walsh, but Patricia Henderson was conspicuously absent. "Where's your client?" Judge Torres asked. "Miss Henderson has resigned from the board and declined to attend today's hearing," Rebecca Walsh said. "I'm representing the HOA as an organization and the individual board members who remain as defendants." Marcus presented our damages calculation. $50,000 in water theft, $75,000 for harassment and emotional distress, and $100,000 in punitive damages. He walked the judge through each category with supporting documentation. Rebecca Walsh argued for reduced damages. "Your Honor, the HOA has already paid $35,000 per the previous judgment. The organization's reserves are depleted. Excessive damages will require special assessments on all homeowners, many of whom had no knowledge of the board's actions." "That's not the plaintiff's problem," Judge Torres said. "The HOA is a legal entity responsible for its board's actions. How you distribute those costs among homeowners is an internal matter." She thought for a moment. "Here's my ruling. Total damages of $175,000, which includes the $35,000 already paid, so the HOA owes an additional $140,000. $50,000 of that is joint and several liability, meaning the HOA and the individual board members are all responsible. The remaining $90,000 is the HOA's responsibility alone. Rebecca Walsh stood. Your Honor, may I ask for a payment plan? The HOA cannot pay this sum immediately. Mr. Chen, Marcus looked at me and I nodded. We're amenable to a reasonable payment plan, Your Honor. Fine. Payments of $10,000 per month starting November 1st. If any payment is missed, the full balance becomes due immediately. Is that acceptable? Yes, Your Honor, both attorneys said. As we left the courtroom, Nicole Ortiz approached me again. Mr. Lawson, I know this has been terrible for you. On behalf of the new board, I want to formally apologize. We're going to make the payments on time every time. And we'd like to invite you to a community meeting next month. We're redesigning the lake system to use well water and storm runoff instead of natural springs. We'd value your input. I appreciate the invitation, I said. I'll think about it. Back home, I stood at my kitchen window looking down at my spring. The water flowed clear and strong, feeding the creek just as it had for centuries. My cattle grazed peacefully nearby. Everything was as it should be. Over the following months, the HOA made their payments on time. Patricia Henderson sold her house in Meadowbrook Estates and moved out of state. I heard through the grapevine that she'd taken a job in Florida. The other board members who'd been involved in the fraud also left the board, though they remained in the community. The DA ultimately decided not to pursue criminal charges. According to Deputy Rodriguez, they felt the civil judgment was sufficient punishment and that a criminal trial would be difficult to win beyond reasonable doubt, even with the documentary evidence. I was fine with that. The point had been made. In December, I received a formal invitation to the Meadowbrook Estates holiday party from Nicole Ortiz. I almost didn't go, but something made me reconsider. These were my neighbors, whether I liked it or not. And most of them had been victims of Patricia Henderson's schemes just like I had. I showed up to the party at the community center with a bottle of wine and low expectations. But the reception was warm. People came up to me, introduced themselves, apologized for the mess I'd been put through. Several people asked about my cattle operation and my land with genuine interest. Nicole Ortiz gave a short speech thanking everyone for coming and talking about the community's fresh start. She mentioned the water situation briefly, saying the new well system was working perfectly and that the community had learned valuable lessons about transparency and accountability. Afterward, she approached me with a serious expression. Stephen, can I talk to you privately for a minute? We stepped outside onto the patio. The lake was visible from where we stood, its surface reflecting the holiday lights strung around the community center. I wanted you to know something, Nicole said. When we did the full financial audit after removing the old board, we found some things. Patricia had been skimming from HOA funds for years. Phony invoices, inflated contractor bills, fake expenses. We're talking about $60,000 or more. Did you report it? Yes, to the DA and to our insurance company. The insurance will cover most of what she stole, but there's going to be a criminal investigation now. I thought you should know, since you were considering whether to push for charges related to the water theft. This is different, though. This is stealing from your community. It is. But it also shows a pattern. Patricia Henderson isn't someone who made one bad decision. She's someone who consistently put her own interests above everyone else's and broke the law to do it. I nodded slowly. Thanks for telling me. I hope your community can recover. We will. But Stephen, I want to say something else. We redesigned the lake system, like I mentioned, but we're also planning a community park on the south side of the development. We'd like to include educational materials about the area's natural water systems and ecology. Would you be willing to let us interview you about the spring and its history? Nothing intrusive, just your perspective as someone who protects natural resources. I was surprised. Yeah, I'd be willing to do that. Great. I'll be in touch after the holidays. I left the party feeling better than I had in months. The situation had been ugly, but it had also revealed something important. Most people, when given the truth, will do the right thing. The HOA members weren't the enemy. Patricia Henderson and her enablers were. January brought closure in an unexpected way. The Jefferson County DA's office filed criminal charges against Patricia Henderson for theft from the HOA, fraud, and embezzlement. The charges related to her skimming of HOA funds, not the water situation, but it felt like justice nonetheless. She eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and full restitution to Meadowbrook Estates. She also agreed to never serve on an HOA board again. The February payment from Meadowbrook arrived on time, as did March's and April's. By May, almost a year after I'd first discovered the pipes snaking across my property, the situation had settled into a new normal. I did the interview for the community park project, talking about the spring's history and the importance of water rights in Colorado. Nicole told me the park would open in August with an interpretive trail explaining the local watershed. One afternoon in late May, I was working in my barn when I heard a vehicle coming up my driveway. I stepped outside to find a Jefferson County Sheriff's SUV. Deputy Rodriguez got out, smiling. "Mr. Lawson, how are you?" "Doing well, Deputy. What brings you out here?" "Just following up. We've had 0 complaints or incidents related to your property in over 6 months. I wanted to close out our harassment investigation formally. For the record, there won't be any charges filed, but I wanted you to know we documented everything. If you ever have issues in the future, there's a paper trail. I appreciate that. Also, between you and me, what you did took guts. Standing up to an HOA with deep pockets and lawyers isn't easy. A lot of people would have just let it go." "It was my property," I said simply. "Nobody has the right to take what's mine." She nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. Take care, Mr. Lawson." After she left, I walked down to the spring one more time. The grass had grown back over where the pump had been. In another few months, you wouldn't be able to tell anything had ever been there. The water bubbled up between the granite boulders, clear and cold, just as it had for thousands of years. It would keep flowing long after I was gone, after the HOA community was gone, after all of this was forgotten. But for now, it was mine, protected by law, by my deed, and by my willingness to fight for what was right. I knelt down and cupped some water in my hands, drinking deeply. It tasted like victory. The final payment from Meadowbrook Estates HOA arrived on October 1st, right on schedule. I deposited the check and called Marcus to let him know. "That's it then," he said. "Case closed. How does it feel? Like I can finally move on? You thinking of staying on the property long term?" "Can't imagine living anywhere else," I said, looking out my kitchen window at the land that stretched before me. "This is home." And it was, not just the 40 acres or the house or even the spring, but the principle of it all. The knowledge that sometimes when you stand up for what's right, when you refuse to be bullied or intimidated, justice actually prevails. The HOA had tried to take what was mine. They'd failed. And in failing, they'd learned a lesson that every property owner in America needs to remember. Your rights matter, your deed matters, and no organization, no matter how powerful they think they are, can simply take what belongs to you. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to the spring. to Judge Morrison and Judge Torres, to Marcus and Deputy Rodriguez, and even to Nicole Ortiz and the other Meadowbrook residents who'd chosen integrity over convenience. Then I got back to work, secure in the knowledge that my water would keep flowing, my cattle would keep grazing, and my property would remain mine, just the way it should be.